Yes, we all know the quality of makeup and skincare products are important, but have you ever thought about how you apply them is even more important for results? Since 2019, Anissa Beauty has been leading the way in creating vegan and cruelty-free makeup and skincare brushes that are safe for your skin and the planet and are designed to optimize the application and absorption of skincare products. Their popular Pinnacle foundation brush has made such a big difference for me. I used to hate wearing foundation because it always felt so caked on, but with this brush, I can use so little product and it goes on flawlessly due to its patented triangular shape. Anissa Beauty's brushes deliver value and quality like no other. The same goes for their Pinnacle Skin Brush, which has completely changed how I apply skincare. I no longer use my hands to apply my products. Check out the Pinnacle Foundation Brush as well as several other amazing brushes at anissabeauty.com and get 30% off site-wide with the code DATEABLE. That's ANISA beauty.com. And don't forget to use the code DATEABLE.
Guys, when I found out that Artifact Uprising was going to be one of our sponsors, I lost my mind because I've literally done all my holiday shopping through them for the last couple of years, and the gifts are always a massive hit. Artifact Uprising is a Colorado-based company that sells premium quality, customizable photo goods for your digital photos. They want to help you preserve your meaningful moments this holiday season. Whether you want to say I love you with the perfect gift, display favorite memories in your home, or connect with loved ones throughout the year, they have a product you can personalize. I've gotten photo books, calendars, and scrapbooks, and they are always simply beautiful and always a hit because of how personalized they feel. Like I mentioned, I've gotten many gifts over the years, but I kind of wanted my own photo book about having that physical memento to put in your home. I decided to make a photo book of me and my partner's first year together, and we have just so many photos, but it was easy to go through them, and the book came out beautifully. And who knows, maybe one day we can share it with our future children to show them how young and crazy their parents once were. Artifact Uprising makes it easy to tell your story. Through the end of the year, Dateable listeners can give Artifact Uprising a try and get 20% off for new customers or 15% off if you purchased before. Just visit artifactuprising.com and use the code Dateable through December 31st.
Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Kraftchick.
We're active daters turned dating insiders.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to Dateable. Hello, friends.
Welcome back to another episode of Dateable.
I am feeling just dragged around by this weather. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. And I know it's so cliche to talk about weather, but 1 minute it's cold, 1 minute it's 100 degrees. I don't know how I feel about myself at this moment.
It's like an on again, off again relationship where it's hot and cold one day, changes up the next. Situationship weather. We'll call it that.
That's what it feels like. Because I thought we were changing seasons. I was like, bring out my jackets. It's getting cool in the morning. And this is very much like when LA changes weather, you're like, okay, this is a change in weather because it rarely happens. But then now we're back to 90 to 100 degree weather. I'm like, what?
Yeah. I mean, we have the heat wave at the time of recording in SF as well. And, you know, I'm preparing for my Italy trip and I don't know what to expect weather-wise there either. I feel like...
Oh, it's going to be nice.
I think so. You know, that's what people say is October, 70s.
Yeah.
Perfect weather. But I've been seeing a lot of stuff about rain. So I'm really hoping we don't get that. Just,
well, it'll be more romantic.
Know. I'm bringing my poncho.
What?
Last trip we did to Mexico, that was our last year trip. We try to do a trip every year. And we showed up. We went to Puerto Vallarta and one of my best friends was there. She was living with her now husband at the time. And we showed up and we kind of knew it was like rainy season, but we didn't know what to expect. We thought they were just like, yeah, drizzles. It's not a big deal. Definitely come this time of year. And we showed up and it was just like buckets of rain that first night.
No.
And I bought a poncho, but then it lifted. And it actually wasn't bad the rest of the trip. So I didn't actually ever use it, but I've got it. I'm ready to go.
I'm fucking using this poncho. Okay.
You know what I'm talking about? Those like little ones that come in the bag.
Yeah.
Like it's super easy to pack up. I hope I don't have to use it. I'm knocking on wood as I say that.
Yeah.
I'll send you a photo if I am in it.
But if you do use it, then you do feel like, oh, I get to use something that I didn't use before.
Yeah, that whole $5 poncho.
Dude, I don't know. There's something about when I go on trips, I feel like I have to use everything I packed. And that's what makes me feel like it was a successful trip. If I check everything in my bag, it's like, oh, use that once. I don't know. It's some weird thing. Like, oh, that was a successful trip.
So we learned that there will be 2 opportunities for laundry on this trip.
Okay.
So I think that's going to be a game
That's
changer.
huge. Just make sure you give yourself enough time to dry the clothes. That's what I'm learning.
Yes, thank you.
That's what I'm learning about European washing machines. Dryer does not exactly dry. So you may not be in rainy weather, but your clothes may be damp.
That would be the best. It's like, oh, did you hit rain? No, I just didn't dry my clothes long enough.
Oh, yeah. I'm so excited for you. That's going to be such a great romantic trip.
Speaking of romantic, that brings us to our topic today, modern day marriage. And the question of I do, I think, that's the book title of our guest today, Allison Raskin.
And why is Allison so perfect for this topic? Well, she is a New York Times bestselling author. We mentioned her book, I Do, I Think, Conversations About Modern Marriage. She's a mental health advocate, relationship expert, and she now has a master's in psychology. And she's also a comedian. So I like that she can see the humor in all of this too. It's not that serious, and it is serious at the same time.
And she's also written a bunch of other books, one that may be very relevant to daters, Overthinking About You, Navigating Romantic Relationships When You Have Anxiety, OCD, and Depression, and also love her YouTube channel and podcast, Just Between Us.
Yeah. What's on everyone's mind, I hope, is marriage for me? And if it is, how do I make it about me and not these social constructs of what marriage has been? And you've seen all the articles and all the news stories about how, like marriage is just this antiquated system, but the idea of a deeper commitment is still something many of us strive for. And maybe it doesn't look like marriage, but right now, the way our legal system is built, marriage is the only way to be legally committed to someone, right? So then it does make you think, do I want to pursue that deeper commitment with someone for the sake of deeper commitment, or is it for the sake of, checking marriage off my list of things to do?
And of course, we love visiting this topic, but I think especially Allison's story caught our attention because she's someone, and she'll go into this in much more depth, that she was engaged to the person that she thought she'd end up with. And he basically left their engagement.
Yep.
They called off their engagement, and it set her out on this mission to really understand marriage. She still very much believed in marriage, wanted marriage, but wanted to understand modern day marriage. So she talked to a slew of experts and then wrote this book.
Yeah, and I'm so glad she did, because we've been looking at marriage all wrong since modern dating has been created, since apps have started and started changing our environment around love. It's like, it's just not serving us in the way it used to serve us back in the day when women really depended on men. And so we needed marriage to survive. And now, because we don't need marriage to survive, we are arguably one of the first generations to truly marry for love. What does that look like? That's what's so complicated.
I mean, what's your take on marriage nowadays? I feel like for me, I still very much want to get married. Like, that is important to me. And I think it is because it holds that deeper commitment. It makes it feel more like a family and a partnership. And it's something that, despite modern era, and I absolutely agree that you could have all that without marriage, but there's something for me that still makes that a priority and something I want in life.
I feel like I still want a legal commitment to someone, because there's something about, I am by law bound to this person and accountable for this person. That's different than, I've been living with this person and I love them and they're my partner for life. It still feels different to me. It still feels like you have an easier out than not. And so in that sense, I think having that deeper commitment recognized by the legal system is something I would want Is it marriage? Like, I know systemically that would be marriage, but on paper or labeling wise, I think after what I went through with my ex, we're like trying to have kids and trying to get married. I don't want that anymore. I don't want that idea of marriage anymore. At this point, I'm not going to have kids. So I really don't see the need to be married to do that. But if I were to have kids, I think I would want marriage on paper.
That's interesting. I feel like I have a very different take. Like the legal side isn't important to me. I think it's more of just like what marriage stands for. And like, I know a lot of friends of mine are married, quote unquote. They had weddings, they celebrated, they did vows, but they're not like legally actually married for many reasons. Yeah. So I think for me, it's less about the legal side. And I think also like, even if the plan is to try to have kids at some point, but like if that doesn't happen, I still very much want to be married. So it's just so interesting, like how different everyone's take is. And that's kind of the point of this discussion, to really understand what's your take.
Yeah. And it's good to sit and ask yourself this question. Because I think for the longest time, I just assumed I would get married. I didn't think, do I want to get married? What does an ideal marriage look like for me? I just assumed it would happen. And when the last relationship kind of blew up and it ended in deception, when we were headed in that direction, I think it made me realize that what I would envision as ideal marriage is not what I envisioned before. And that's a good thing. I don't need anybody to convince me that this is the way to do it. And I don't need to convince anybody else that my way is the way to do it. I think ultimately what we get to in this conversation is you get to come to your own conclusion of what kind of marriage, if you do want marriage, works for you.
This episode is for anyone who is unsure if they want to say I do, if they can't tell if it's society's influence or something they want, but also for the people that absolutely know they want to get married, but want to understand all the options and a modern view.
Yeah. And maybe you just have no idea. It could be for someone who's like, I don't know. Give me all the reasons for and against, and then I can make my own decisions. This is a perfect episode for you too, because I think Allison also uncovers some of her findings through her conversations with various couples on their views of marriage. And maybe that'll inspire something in you too.
Yeah. And I think this is also for anyone that's experienced heartbreak with marriage, whether it's an engagement that didn't work out or a partner that couldn't go all the way or divorce and wants to not feel like as alone. We go into this in much more depth of like, you can only control so much and you didn't necessarily pick wrong. Like there's a lot of shame around, it not leading to marriage. So this is for anyone that wants to feel, like heard and seen and know that you're on the right path no matter what's happened in the past.
A really good topic of discussion for you and your friends too. Like, don't you want to know what your friends think? I certainly want to know, especially my friends who've been married for a while. Many of them have changed their idea of marriage. And now that they're 10 or 15 years in, they're like, if I were to date again, my idea of what a marriage should be would be very different.
And that really is what you're going to get out of this too, is you're going to ultimately decide if marriage is for you. And maybe you won't decide from this episode alone, but it will be a stepping stone, or maybe you'll have that aha moment after listening and be like, this is what I want.
Yeah. It's also what you'll take away is how to not let fear get in your way, because we can't predict the future. We can't predict what someone will be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 5 months from now. So how do we remove the things that we can't control and focus back on what we can control?
Yeah, and learn that it's okay to let go of that control.
Yeah.
And then also, I think a big piece of this is how to navigate when one person is ready for marriage and the other is not quite there. Allison shares her story with her current husband, that they are married happily now, but it's not always realistic that people are going to be on the exact same timeline at the exact same second.
Not at all. So you're definitely going to get a lot from this conversation, and it's going to get your wheels turning. about this topic.
Okay, well, we'll save it for the actual interview. But before we do, wanted to share something special that we've been working on. We're always looking at ways to help you get unstuck from where you're currently at. We created this tool, a relationship readiness score, to give you insight into how ready are you for that real deal relationship that, a lot of us, many of us say that we're looking for. And from that information, what do you do to get to that point?
Yeah. A lot of times we don't know what's getting in our way and what's keeping us stuck. And we say we want one thing, but our actions are pointing another way. So this tool, and once you answer these questions, it's going to help you understand how to get these obstacles out of your way. So you're clearing your path to a relationship or to love or whatever it is that you're looking for.
Yeah. And this is a free tool. So we want to make this as accessible as possible. You can just go to our website, dateablepodcast.com. You'll see it. It's right on the homepage, front and center. So you won't miss it. Basically, like Yue was saying, you fill out some questions, we give you the score, and then we'll also recommend relevant episodes. We get a ton of questions from people all the time of like, what episodes are good for me? And it's really hard if we don't know where you're at. So this will help that. And then we'll also give you other suggestions and other offerings that we have that can help you along your journey.
And we're so excited about this because when we first started this podcast and had like 10 listeners, we were able to help those 10 people individually on their journeys. But now as we scale our audience and you're all growing and we're growing, we still want to be there for you through something that's more timely, right? So it's not like just the brunch talks or just the podcast, just the book, which aren't addressing whatever you're going through in the moment. This tool will help you to rethink through whatever it is you're going through in the moment. Like we're right there with you. Julie and I just being like, you got this.
And I remember doing something similar. It wasn't the exact same thing, but back in the day when I was just like, why is dating not working for me? Actually it was with the dating coach Marnie Batista that we've had on this podcast before. And I told her all of this. Like she had something, I forget what it was called exactly, but it was in the same realm of like giving you more concrete information of like what was getting in your way. And honestly, it was game changing for me just to like get that and be able to like make some moves accordingly. Having like a score, something like a little more tangible, I think really helps with that. Don't worry, you're all dateable. Like no one's going to get like an F.
No, every score is a good score.
No one's going to get like an F on this relationship readiness score. No. But it will unpack where there's room for improvement, which, I mean, if you're not where you are, then that's probably a good thing, right?
And did we already mention, we'll mention again, it's free. It's free. Go to dateablepodcast.com right now. You take it, have your friends take it, have your mom take it. I don't know, anybody, get people to take it. See what scores they get.
Love it. I'm looking forward to some comparisons in the Facebook group. I think this will be fun.
Oh, that would be fun. Like comparisons of people's mom scores. That would be funny. My mom scored super ready.
And then while you're at it, you can also pre-order How to Be Dateable.
Oh, yeah.
Just go over to the book section of the website. You're already there. As we've said over and over again, this is what does it for us. We are extremely grateful for everyone that's already pre-ordered. And let's keep the train moving because this is how we get to a more dateable world, all in all.
Just a little book we wrote 2.5 years ago. Not a big deal. Only took us 2.5 years to do this. No biggie.
Final announcements at Dateable Podcast. That's where you can find us on Instagram. We will also be announcing some freebies that come with pre-ordering the book. Don't worry though, you will get those even if you pre-order today, so no need to hold back on that. But stay tuned for next week's episode and then announcements on Instagram. So if you're not following us there, make sure to do so at Dateable Podcast. Okay, well, before we get into it, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors.
This episode of Dateable is brought to you by Wild Grain. This fall, treat yourself and your loved ones to baked goods from Wild Grain. You won't want to miss the seasonal items they have this fall, and rumor has it they'll have a small number of apple cider donuts, so get them before they sell out. Plus, Wild Grain makes for a great host gift for all your gatherings this holiday season. If you're not familiar with Wild Grain, it's the first bake from frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, pastries, and pastas. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable to your tastes and dietary restrictions. In addition to their classic variety box, they recently launched a new gluten-free box and a plant-based box that is 100% vegan. Best of all, they take the hassle out of baking since all items bake from frozen in 25 minutes or less with no mess or cleanup. When I got my box, I went straight for the pumpkin cinnamon biscuits. My whole house smelled like fall. I was so impressed with baking them directly from frozen and taking only 25 minutes. What? And not to mention how delicious tasting they were. Are you ready to bring all your favorite carbs right to your doorstep? Be sure to check out Wild Grain so you can begin building your own box of artisanal breads, pastas, and pastries. For a limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off the first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/dateable to start your subscription. You heard me, free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/dateable. That's wildgrain.com/dateable, or you can use the promo code DATEABLE at checkout. As the crisp fall air rolls in and the leaves begin to change, don't rely only on pumpkin to spice up your life. Embrace the natural power of cannabis this fall with Via. Whether you're lounging by the fire or exploring new adventures, Via's premium federally legal cannabis products are your perfect companion. Farmed and crafted with care in the U.S. and trusted by over 500,000 customers, Via has a product for everyone. Via just launched their high THCA flower and brand new flavors for the THCA vape slime, so you have more options than ever to blaze your own trail. You've all heard me talking also about their gummies. My favorite is the High Love Gummy that will awaken your senses and increase blood flow. I absolutely love it for pretty much every occasion. So if you are over 21 years of age, head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. This fall, enhance your everyday with Via.
I've been really brushing up on my Italian for my trip to Italy, and this partnership with Rosetta Stone could not have come at a better time. I've been carving out 30 minutes a day on my walks, and their app has made learning a new language so easy. And it's not just Italian. This is such a steal right now because Rosetta Stone is offering our listeners lifetime access with 25 languages for 50% off the normal price. If you're looking to brush up on your Spanish, French, or even Arabic or Polish, they got you as the trusted expert for 30 years and millions of users. The best part, though, is how fast it is because Rosetta Stone immerses you in the language, and there's built-in speech recognition to give you feedback on your pronunciation. So don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. Dateable listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/today. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today today. Okay, let's hear it from Allison all about modern day marriage.
Hello, Allison. Welcome to Dateable. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. I hope this means I am officially dateable.
Oh, 100%.
Times in my life where I was not.
Without a doubt, that was not even a question on our mind.
Anybody who can write the book called I Do, I Think is most likely dateable. By the way, I've had this book on my coffee table for a while, and it's the best conversation starter for anybody who comes over. Everyone grabs this book and they go, I do, I think. Like, yeah, let's talk.
Well, that's what makes you dateable. You're not just rushing into things. You're actually thinking it through. So
now that I said it, I'm like, well, I am married, so I guess I'm not dateable, really.
Doesn't stop. So you are married now to your husband, John, that you talk about in the book. And you're also engaged to someone else before that who ended up calling off the engagement. So I'm curious, like, how did both of these experiences impact you even wanting to write a book about marriage? Because it sounds like a lot of different experiences that went down for you.
So I would say that the broken engagement was really the catalyst for the book because I was someone who had just wanted to be married my whole life, kind of obsessed with the idea of marriage to unhealthy levels at certain points, basically wink, wink, my 20s. And then what happened was I thought I had done it, right? I finally had gone to engage to this guy who was like everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. And then 6 months later, he just left without really much of an explanation other than something is missing, right? And so it was really this realization that like, oh, you're never safe. Like, and it was this weird thing because you know how the human mind doesn't make any sense. I had always feared that I wouldn't get married, but then I had this sense that if I did, it would last. And that's probably because in my family, there are like almost no divorces. So I sort of just like have this frame of reference for like, yes, you get married and then you stay married, even though I very much logically knew that that was not true. And so even though we weren't married, I had viewed engagement sort of as the same level of commitment. And it was really for me just sort of like, oh, now we plan the party. But like once you ask me to marry you, we've reached that level. And so then when he left, it was like kind of just shattered all of my illusions about marriage and seeing it as sort of this like end goal that would then finally mean I could like relax and just like sink into partnership. And then I started dating my now husband. And it was sort of this thing of like, how can I approach marriage now that I don't think it will save me? And now that I don't think that it's necessarily going to last forever? What is my relationship to marriage now that I don't think it is like the holy grail, right? And so I kind of like dove in. And then the other element of the book was that I didn't understand how some people did it. Like, right? You look around, you're like, how are some people staying together for decades or their entire life? Like, what is the secret sauce? And like, why have I struggled so much in my relationships, even though I see my parents and my sister and all these people I know, and they seem to have quote unquote figured it out, right? So the book I kind of described as like an investigation, or like I'm going undercover to like figure out how do you make this work? But also it then really expanded into, but why do we even do it? You know, because now that it's like 2024, the societal need to get married, at least in Western culture, and that's a big caveat. I only really cover Western marriage because it's such a culturally charged thing that you like can't talk about it in every culture because it's so different. And there are obviously pockets of people that are living in Western culture that have a different relationship towards it. But I was like, if we don't need it anymore, because I as a woman can now get my own mortgage, have my own credit card, I can live with my partner without people like gasping, you know, I can just cohabitate. I don't have to get married. Why do people still take this risk, even though there is such a high divorce rate? And so it was really interesting just sort of like diving into that and just how much significance we attach to marriage on a cultural level, a financial level, emotional level. And so the end result of the book isn't really like that I'm pro-marriage for everyone. It's more really understanding why I value marriage and how to maybe help other people discover why they would value marriage. And then also saying, but you don't have to do this. You know, if marriage doesn't jive with you or you don't feel like this is something that makes sense to you, given the patriarchal, harmful history of it, then don't do it. And that's kind of great that you don't have to do it anymore.
In your research, what did you discover about the old Allison that's different from the new post-broken engagement Allison? Because I'm asking this from someone who always thought, when I was like 5 years old, I thought, of course, when I get older, I'm going to get married. I didn't think about why. It was just like, right. Of course, people get old and they get married. But now as I'm delaying marriage and thinking about it, it's a whole other ballgame of thinking about why is it even important. So can you take us back to the old Allison, why she thought marriage was so important? What was it?
I actually think my reasons for thinking it's important have remained the same. For me, marriage symbolizes family. And so it is just allowing my partner to enter a level of intimacy that I've only ever had with my immediate family. And so allowing myself to feel dependent and connected to them in a way that I just, for whatever reason, didn't feel comfortable doing until I was married. But a big thing that's changed, I'd say, is I now really don't think that a marriage has to last until death to be successful. I think that there's the possibility that you can have a 10-year marriage and it's wonderful and loving, and then something happens or you grow apart and it no longer makes sense. And I don't think that that would be a mistake. You know, I used to think that it's like if you don't make it to the finish line, it was all for naught.
Yeah.
But I actually think that marriages of many lengths can be super valuable. it's really about just kind of continuously checking in with yourself by being like, is this additive? Because if it's no longer additive to your life, if it no longer enhances your life, then it might not make sense anymore. But that doesn't negate the fact that maybe for 30 years it did.
Mm-hmm. I really like that actually in your book, that you just normalized divorce. I want to come back to that for sure, but I'm curious, like, when you talk to, the various people that you did during this research, like, what were some of the conflicting views that you saw on marriage? Like, what is the pulse of marriage, I guess, with like millennials, Gen Z, or maybe even like Gen X that have been married before?
I think something that's really funny is like people's views on prenups. Like there's a story in the book where, one couple, one of the wives is a lawyer. And so she deals with legality all day. She like understands probably how difficult divorce is. And she refused to get a prenup. And so I thought that was very funny because to her emotional side took over her logical side when it came to prenups. And I think that speaks to a trend that you can see quite often, that like, and I think this about all romantic relationships, like we show up in our romantic relationships kind of different than we do in the rest of our lives, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Haven't you ever been like, wow, I've never behaved this way with anyone else. Why is this bringing this out of me right now? Or why do I feel this way that's like weirdly superstitious when I'm not a superstitious person? Like it just can bring up these parts of ourselves that are otherwise kind of dormant or inactive. And so I think that was interesting, of like how people will still view prenups and how some people will still view it as like a bad sign if you want one, when I actually think that they should become more and more normalized, depending on your state.
Yes.
In California, the laws are pretty fair. So like we didn't need to get one, but we kind of agreed that if we leave California, we'll get one because that's a postnup. And so I also think just like when I was growing up, the idea of a single income house made a lot of sense and was very normalized. And now I really see the dangers of a single income house and not keeping your toe in the workforce in some way unless you are super protected. And so that means that if like one partner, and this is often a woman in a heterosexual relationship, but it can happen in any relationship, decides to take themselves out of the workforce to care for the children or for whatever reason, they have to be so protected that if the marriage ends, that their quality of life will not plummet compared to the partner that stayed in the workforce. And so I think just like finally getting to that place of like, you can't just assume it's going to be okay.
That's so funny that you said California made you want a prenup less, because I live in California and I feel like I have the exact opposite feeling towards it, because it just shows like how individual everyone is in their situation. And what I like about prenups is you're deciding the rules, not the state that you live in. So I think, yeah, of course, like it's an individual decision whether you should get one. But I think this notion of like, it means the relationship is doomed.
No, yeah.
It's interesting to hear that some people are still holding on to that even in 2024.
Definitely. Or just that it means that you're not fully committed. But the way I talk about it in the book is basically like you don't get car insurance because you plan on getting into an accident. You get car insurance in case you get into an accident.
Right. But don't you think systemically the problem is divorces are just ugly? Our legal system just makes divorces so gut-wrenching and nasty that all we think about when it comes to divorce is all the negative associations with it. If we'd removed some of the legal challenges around divorces, I think marriages might be more successful.
Yeah.
I feel like some couples are like, oh, let's just hold on. Let's just hold on till the end, like a few more years. But if we are free to exit a marriage, obviously it can't be that easy. But if it's just more positive, then I think marriages wouldn't be this tough for people to swallow.
Yeah.
Well, that's the good thing about negotiating a prenup is that you're negotiating it when you're on good terms.
Right.
Right. You're negotiating it when you're in love and when you respect the person.
Yes.
And hopefully.
Right.
But also, it can be very revealing how that negotiation goes, right? Because it will show how your partner maybe views you or values you if they're trying to give you an unfair prenup or postnup even.
Right. I guess that like begs the question that I think a lot of people have is like, why just not live together? Like, why even do all the legalities, have this whole thing that you have to come up with a prenup or not do a prenup or go through the legal stuff?
I think there are like two major elements. One is practical and one is emotional. Like practically, you can't get on your partner's health insurance. Like that's a major thing. You know, a lot of people get married for health insurance. They also will maybe get married so that they can have the ability to make medical decisions about their partner in a way that like you can't if you're just cohabitating. I mean, some states have different laws in terms of common law, or if you get,
like
you know,
California
a domestic partnership or something like that.
Yeah, so easy.
It also comes with a social status. People tend to take your relationship more seriously if you're married, especially if you have children together. It's like less confusing for your kids to have to describe and talk about their family.
Yeah.
Because it's like this thing that is just like inherently understood in our culture. And also like the benefits of like maybe you'll get some tax breaks. Maybe you'll throw a wedding and you'll get 10 grand in gifts and you'll get celebrated and attention. And, you know, like it's this big milestone. You get to say, now I'm an adult. Now I'm married. Whereas marriage used to really be the beginning of adulthood. Now it's sort of a thing that is happening when people feel like they are financially secure. And so it's sort of like the icing on the cake of like, I'm proving to you that I did life right. I figured it out, you know?
Yeah.
And then on the emotional level, I think that for some people, because of how we grow up with marriage and how it is so emphasized in our society, there can be just a level of intimacy that is not unlocked until you are married, right? So like, maybe you wouldn't really feel comfortable paying for your partner to go back to grad school unless you were married, right? Because like if you're not married, there could be a level of like, I pay for this and then you bail tomorrow. Like there's just some extra legal protections and sort of like cultural protections, right? Because it's like people will just view you different if you just like bail on your spouse than if you break up with your partner, right? We just still think of it and view it differently. And I think for some people, it just like, it maybe just is like a mental shift of we are now a unit moving through this world together. We can combine our finances because there's a legal document binding us to each other. We can pool our resources. Therefore, we can like make more money faster because we have combined investments, combined help. And so just sort of feeling like you have some backup for the decisions you make around your relationship. Like, you know, if you buy a house together, you don't have to get like a lawyer involved to make sure you're both protected because like the marriage does that. There's a lot of appeal to it, especially in the way that our culture is currently set up. What I'm curious about is if our culture is moving away towards putting so much onus on marriage, and if it becomes less of a social status, will as many people get married? And it's hard to say.
Yeah. That's my question for you, your opinion. Do you think society is just behind when it comes to mindset around marriage and also legalities around marriage? Or do you think society is actually catching up to this new way? Because like I've heard that Gen Z doesn't really think about marriage the same way that many of us do.
I'm pro-marriage. I feel like everything I've been saying, it sounds like I'm not. I actually am really pro-marriage for certain people. For people that really want to go through life in a partnership, in a committed partnership, I think that marriage is a beautiful, wonderful thing. I don't necessarily think that that's a lifestyle that everybody wants. But I think that the thing that would really have to happen for marriage to have less social status and appeal is for other relationships to get the same level of societal approval, right? Because like we've expanded marriage so now more people can do it, but we're not expanding the strength of friendship or the strength of a parent-child relationship, right? Like I can't put my best friend on my health insurance, even if I live with my best friend, right? I can't like have my best friend make my medical decisions for me. And so I think what would really have to shift, and I think that very much could happen, is just like a reshuffling of how we view and rank different relationships in our lives. Because for a lot of people, their friendships are the most important relationships in their lives, but society doesn't view it that way.
No.
Right? And so then there's still this pull to be like, well, but no one's validating the importance that my platonic best friend has to me or my grandma or, you know, my cousin. And so I think if we become more expansive in how we view human relationship and we stop kind of ranking the values of the different relationships and instead judge it more by the role it plays in our individual lives, then I can see marriage becoming less prioritized and important. I think Gen Z is kind of in a place of like, speaking with a broad brush, but like, I think there's a sense of people don't have to get married, but maybe I still want to, you know?
I think it's interesting what you were saying about just like normalizing the other relationships or lifting them up, because I think that's exactly it. Like I remember for years, it was like, I always like had marriage in the back of my mind, but it wasn't necessarily like the biggest priority because I felt like, you know, I had all this other connection. But then society kind of makes it be like all your friends are eventually going to pair off, get married, and like that's their primary relationship. And that's the way our society is built. So like, how do you get to the root of like, do I want to get married for me versus like, this is what I should do. This is what everyone else is doing. I'm going to be left behind, like all of that.
Yeah, that was a big goal in the book, was to help people figure out that question and figure out what marriage means to them individually, and to sort of piece out what do I want versus what are people's expectations of me, and what is driving this desire. And so I think it's really just like having conversations with yourself and also potentially with your partner of like, why do I want to get married? You know, like, how can I answer that question? For me, I answered it with seeing my husband as my family, feeling comfortable being dependent on him to the level I'm dependent on my family. That's neither a good nor bad thing that's true about me, right? But it just simply is. And so I think a thing to sit with this is say, if I was living with my partner for 30 years and we never got married, would I feel like I was missing out on something? Right? If I'm in a committed relationship, we show up for each other, all the intricacies of how I want a relationship to work happens. You know, would I feel like there was something I still wanted that I didn't have? And if the answer is like, not really, then you probably don't need to get married. But if the answer is actually, yeah, like it is important for me to like have this public declaration of our love, to make these vows to each other in front of the people that we love, and also just to each other, to just like have it on record being like, I'm showing up for you in this way, I'm showing up for you in that way.
Right.
I also think it's important to allow yourself to say, actually, I don't care about that. And to get to a place where you really sit with yourself and say like, am I performing caring about marriage, or do I actually care about marriage?
You could also have a wedding and not be married.
Yeah. You can kind of do whatever you want, which is really
do whatever
cool.
you want. Yeah. If you really want a big party, you can throw a big party. Nobody's stopping you. So for the people who do want to get married, let's say they read your book and they're like, I'm clear about that. I do want to get married. And then they start dating someone, you know, in those early dating days. Is there something that they should be looking for in a potential partner that could be different than someone who's not looking for a marriage?
I think you have to look for someone who understands how to be in partnership, who understands what it means to be partnered up, because that means that you no longer only care about yourself. You have to take someone else's needs into consideration all of the time, not just when it's convenient. You have to be willing to compromise, and you have to be willing to like work through things, even if like you maybe don't want to and it's really hard.
Yeah.
I think just the ability to be a partner is something to look for. And look, that's not something that necessarily comes natural to all of us, right? Like some people, especially if we're getting married later, maybe you've been living by yourself for the last 7 years. And so like the idea of like taking another person's needs into account is kind of like baffling. Like, you've never had to like text someone that you're going to be home late because you could just come home late. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like you never had to cancel your guy's trip because your partner's sister's getting married. You've never had to prioritize in that sort of way. So I think that there is a learning curve for certain people. But what you want to see is you want to see a willingness to figure it out. You want to see a willingness to learn how to be a good partner rather than a reluctance to have to change the way that they're currently living as a single person.
So in our world today, everyone wants to see it like right away. You know, date 1 or 2, they want to decide, is this person relationship ready, marriage material, all of that. Are there ways to see how partner oriented they are that early on? Or is some of it just like we have to just give it time?
I think it's a mix. I think, unfortunately, you have to give it time, which is something younger me absolutely hated. The idea that actually you don't know someone until you've spent a good amount of time with them. And also, not just spend time with them, but experience things together, right? How do they act in a crisis? How do they act when they're stressed out? How do they act when they're looking for a new job, or they're sick, or I'm sick, or our dog is sick? Like, just sort of like you're collecting evidence constantly about this person to see if they're the right fit for you. And sometimes you need things to happen to get that evidence. But I also think that there's some helpful questions that you can ask along the way. I think learning about someone's relationship histories is interesting, and not just necessarily how it went, but how they view it. Why did their last relationship not work out? What was their point of view? But what would their ex say about it? Is the ex just some crazy person who like everything was their fault? Or do they have the ability to have empathy for another person that things didn't work out with? You want to not just have someone tell you the right thing, you want to also understand how they got there. What work did they do to become this new version of them? And why are they this new version of them? Rather than just taking it at face value.
Right. I mean, that's really hard to do in early dating. It takes a lot of patience and time for like people to unfold. And I think a lot of daters feel like they have to pick right from the beginning. My picker can't be off with this one because I'm picking someone forever. What would you say to daters who are just so stringent about I got to pick the right person from the get-go?
It's impossible to predict what's going to happen with another person. Like, after I went through my broken engagement, I was like, but I picked right. I was like, yeah. He was everything that I wanted in a partner. He was so kind. He was so funny. He prioritized family so much. He was handsome. He was great with kids and dogs. It was every single thing that I had been told to look for in a partner. And also, everyone in my life liked him. Like, my parents thought that he was a great fit for me. Like, my sister thought he was a great fit for me. Like, there was no one saying, actually, Allison, And then he left. Right? So, like, we can only put so much onus on the picking, because a lot of it is what happens after the picking. And yes. Like, experiences change us. Like, I'm not totally convinced that if the pandemic hadn't happened, that we wouldn't have gotten married. But the thing is, the pandemic did happen, and therefore we did not get married. And so I think like having a real acceptance mindset of like dealing with the reality of now and who this person is now, rather than like expecting yourself to be able to predict who they will become and how things will go 30 years from now, just sort of takes a lot of the pressure off. On the cover of my book is a pair of dice in a ring box, and it really symbolizes like it is always a roll of the dice. Like, you can never be sure about anybody. And what's really beautiful is valuing your wants for a partner enough to take that risk, because you care about yourself enough and you love yourself enough that you're going to still put yourself out there, even though it's scary.
I mean, I'm someone that is pro-marriage. I want to get married, but I feel like that's the piece that prevents me a little or gives me cold feet, is this like the need for certainty, right? And I think you're 100% right. Like, we cannot predict the future. We cannot predict what happens 10 years down the line. So you kind of have to just take that leap of faith at some point. But I do think that makes people really commitment phobic, because there is this fear of like that happening. It goes back to the fear of divorce, like, because we've been told that's like kind of the worst thing that can happen. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you start to get comfortable with these unknowns outside of what you were talking about earlier of just being like, okay, divorce can be normalized?
Well, I think a big part of it is normalizing divorce and understanding that that doesn't mean that you're a failure. I think that we grew up with this idea that if your marriage ends in divorce, you screwed up.
Yeah.
And instead just viewing it as like one possible outcome for a marriage, and that it would be hard and you don't want it, but like one possible outcome for a career is you get fired. And then you find another job. Like, right. There's no part of life where like all the outcomes are good or what you wanted. If we can remove a lot of the social stigma around divorce, then I actually think that it's easier to get married, because it's not a choice between life and death. It's a choice between marriage and like heartbreak, which you can handle. You can get yourself through heartbreak, rather than feeling like I'm going to have a scarlet letter on me for the rest of my life, or I'm going to have ruined my life, or I'm going to suddenly be undesirable or tainted in some way. If you kind of reframe the way that you view divorce, then marriage becomes less scary in a lot of ways. But also, this is the thing about what we choose to work on about ourselves, right? There's always stuff you're going to want to work on about yourself, and then you have to figure out what is worth it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And so for some people, working through their fears around marriage and their fears around the fact that it could go wrong, maybe at a certain point they realize, like, so why do it? Why not just live with my partner if my partner is okay with that? I mean, that's the real thing, is you just have to find someone that wants the same relationship contract that you want. And maybe neither of you want marriage. And maybe it's for totally different reasons. Maybe for you, it makes you feel trapped. And maybe for them, they think that it's an archaic institution that we shouldn't partake in anymore. And so I think just like opening yourself up to the fact that, like, if marriage really, really triggers something in you and it feels impossible to work through that, then you can look for a relationship that maybe won't do that.
I want to dive into this even more, but before we do, let's take a quick break to hear from our partners.
You know what season we're entering into? Cashmere season. Oh yes, with the cooler months ahead full of pumpkin spice lattes, wouldn't it be nice to be in a cozy cashmere sweater from Quince while sipping on said pumpkin spice latte? Quince is known for their Mongolian cashmere sweaters from just $50, but also have beautiful leather jackets, cotton cardigans, soft denim, and so much more. I personally have the softest pair of biker shorts from Quince that are just as nice and comfortable as the really expensive brands, but like half the price. See, by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the cost of the middleman, the savings are passed on to us. So lucky us. Get cozy in Quince's high-quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/dateable for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/dateable to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/DATEABLE.
This is a weird thing about me. When I went to summer camp, we were told to take really quick showers to preserve water. It's something I've carried into adult life, and now I'm like, maybe there is a merit to taking longer showers to unwind and relax, especially now that I've been using Osea's new Undaria algae body wash, which has transformed my shower experience into a tropical paradise. Yue and I always talk about this stuff, like we cannot get enough. It's the citrusy scent that just smells so freaking good. Just thinking about it makes me want to take a shower. What I love about it though is how it leaves my skin feeling soft, smooth, and revitalized. I find it to be a much gentler cleansing experience than traditional body washes. And that's because it's pH balanced with a hydrating formula. So upgrade your shower with clean vegan face and body care from Osea. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code DATEABLEPODCAST at OseaMalibu.com. You'll get free samples with every order and free shipping on orders over $60. Head to OSEAMalibu.com and use the code DATEABLEPODCAST for 10% off. Do you like to be in the know of what's really happening with celebrity gossip? Do you like to hear about the drama happening on reality shows before the shows even air? If you're not listening to Cocktails and Gossip yet, the time is now. I'm obsessed with this podcast because each week, Bea and Amanda, the hosts of the podcast, bring you the tea on reality TV and the craziest celebrity blinds from their website, Bravos and Cocktails. You know, I've been on a real Bravo binge lately, so this podcast is the perfect complement. And trust us, they do not hold back. Listen and you'll have some unfiltered tea to spill at your next dinner party or in your group chat. Pop culture lovers, Bravo lovers, and people who just can't get enough gossip. This is a podcast you should definitely check out. And who knows, you might hear something from Cocktails and Gossip first before you hear it anywhere else. Scandival, anyone? Listen to the weekly Cocktails and Gossip podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
So then bring it back to you. Your husband was not as ready to get married as you were.
Yeah.
I'm guessing he always wanted to get married. It was just a matter of when, right? So how were you able to have those conversations and come to a good compromise around it?
I had to understand that not everyone's brain operates the way my brain does, which is
something I'm still learning as well.
Right? I mean, I'm still working through that.
What a concept.
Because I didn't understand where commitment phobia came from. To me, commitment phobia meant that you were not sure about the person you were with. And I had to realize that it has nothing to do with that for a lot of people. Sometimes that's what's going on. But a lot of times it's more that there's a sense that if I commit fully to a relationship, I will lose myself in the relationship, and I don't want to lose myself. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's true, but I think that's a belief that some people have based on their life experiences or maybe the relationships they grew up around, where it's like, if I get married, I lose me. So then the work then becomes that person having to realize, actually, that's maybe not true. Actually, I can maintain my individuality and live in partnership. I can learn how to be interdependent rather than codependent or completely independent. And then also there are some people where it's really coming from a fear of getting hurt. And I think that's more where my husband was coming from, where he just he did not want to jump into something until he felt certain that it was safe enough for him to do that. And for him, the way to get to that point was time. And there was no way that I was going to be able to circumvent that. I couldn't show up and be just so lovely and adorable and so wonderful that suddenly time didn't matter, because time mattered for him. It mattered for him to get to a point where he felt comfortable. And so once I realized that it wasn't a me issue, it was just how he viewed relationships in general, then I was able to not take it so personally. And I could say, hey, actually, the longer it takes for you, the less secure I feel. Can we meet in the middle? Yeah. And that's basically what we ended up doing.
I resonated so much with that, because that is exactly what's going on for me. Mm-hmm. I feel like I immediately jumped to taking it personally. And this was something I dealt with in my dating life. It's something I've dealt with my whole life, that outside of my partner. So how did you get there? Because I think that's the logical side. I'm I see that, I hear that. But sometimes those thoughts just creep in. How do you get those thoughts out? Because I think a lot of us go there.
That's really about your relationship with yourself. Right. So when I didn't like myself, it was very easy for me to say, well, they don't like me either. Or I am unlovable, so of course they're not committing to me. But once I became more secure in myself, then suddenly, it sounds ridiculous. And I was like, well, I'm great. So why wouldn't he want to marry me? Mm-hmm. I was able to just sort of get to a place where I liked myself enough that I was able to see that that was possible, that it didn't have to be me because I'm not the problem here. You know what I mean? Which is kind of weird, but just the more secure you become in yourself, the less shaken you are by other people and how they behave in relationship to you, because you're more of a secure base. And so I think that by working on my self-esteem and by working on how I talked to myself and how I thought about myself, I could get to a place where I felt, if this person actually never gets there, that doesn't mean that I'm unlovable.
Right.
This one person's reaction to me and what they want for their life and my role in it does not define my overall worth, because I define that.
What are your thoughts on ultimatums then?
I'm pro ultimatum.
Are you? Do tell.
That's kind of a wild thing, because I don't necessarily view it as I think sometimes people view ultimatums as manipulative, and I think that they can be manipulative, but I also think it is totally valid. And this is sort of what I said to my husband. I was like, look, I will move in together, but I don't want to move in together if we're not engaged within the year of living together. Okay. Because for me, I really prioritize marriage. That's something that I want. I had not wanted to move in together until we were engaged, but you want that, and therefore I shall do that, but this is my part of the bargain. And so the ultimatum then doesn't become, hey, you promised, you better propose, buddy, or you're going to jail. It then becomes a deal with myself, where if he then hadn't proposed in that year, then I leave.
Right.
Right? It's really about your decisions and then telling your partner your plan.
Yeah.
Right? Saying, this is what I need. And if you don't want to give me that, then I'm going to just remove myself from this relationship. And I think that that's totally valid. And honestly, it's important sometimes for your partner to know you feel that way. Because otherwise, what if I had just made that deal with myself? I never told him. And then suddenly I'm leaving day 366,
Yeah. He has no idea. Yeah.
And he has no idea.
I definitely had the same conversation with my partner moving in. And I think what was hard is stating your own needs and honoring them, but then also acknowledging someone else's needs and what's going on for them. It's easy to just be like, oh, we're just not compatible. We're not moving at the exact same speed. But I'm guessing from your scenario, you're probably glad that you gave it a little extra time, because ultimately you got to where you wanted to be. And, when you're happily married for all the years, you're not going to remember that extra couple months. So how do you balance the two of, honoring yourself, but also there is another person here?
I think it's making sure you have the same end goal, right? Because if I'm moving in with someone and they're not even sure if they want to get married, that's tricky. And that's a lot of ground to get through in 1 year, right? But if you're moving in with someone who says, I absolutely want to get married, and I know I want to get married to you, I'm just not ready to do that yet because I actually want us to have some time just living together and enjoying that phase and just seeing how we live together. And you know what I mean? And so I think it's really like, do we have the same vision for the future? And is our speed to get to that future just a little different? Versus are we heading in totally different directions and therefore good luck to us?
Yeah.
So if your partner's just like, I don't ever want to get married, like, is it doomed? Or do you think there is a way to bridge that gap when someone's so extreme?
If your partner says to you, I don't ever want to get married, then I think you have to say, am I okay never getting married? And if your answer is, yeah, then great. You solve that problem. But if your answer is, no, I want to get married, that tells you what you need to know.
Do you find that even in that conversation and in the research you've done, do you find that people have different definitions of what a marriage means to them?
Well, one couple I interviewed, she really wanted to get married and he had no interest in proposing, even though they'd been together for a long time. And it came out, I think during couples therapy, that he thought that if they got married, then they would immediately have to have kids. Because to him, getting married meant children. And he was pretty young and not interested in having kids. He didn't feel ready for that. But she was like, no. I want to have kids eventually, but getting married doesn't mean we have kids tomorrow. That to me is more just about our union and our commitment as a couple. And so then he was like, oh. And suddenly it was more easy and accessible for him to get married because his whole world wasn't going to turn around and he wasn't going to be a dad the next day.
Huh.
And so they didn't even know that about each other. And they'd been together for a really long time. And so that's why having these really explicit conversations of what appeals to you about this? What doesn't appeal to you about this? How do you think it will change our relationship? Will it change our relationship? Just getting in the weeds, I think, is really crucial.
I was definitely reading your book while I was at a spa with my partner. And I was like, we need to go through your questions at the end because they are really good. And it's you think you know the answers, but we don't ask that explicitly. What else should you think about when you're deciding to get married? What other things should you consider?
I would kind of ask your partner, if you were deeply unhappy, if we were no longer in love or happy, what would we do? Right? Would you be willing to go to couples therapy? Would you be willing to get divorced? Even just understanding, are you open to the idea of divorce?
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird question. But some people are no, marriage is for life. Even if I'm miserable and you're miserable and we hate each other, we have to stay together, And so you want to know that if that's your partner's opinion about marriage, because then you're going to be stuck in a marriage that stinks. But if you're do you view marriage as something that if it is no longer working, then it would make sense for us to get divorced? Are you comfortable with that? That can reveal a lot. Also, their views around couples therapy. I think, what are their views around, taking care of elderly parents, taking care of children? What do they think that the division of labor will be in the home, especially if you end up having children? Do they plan to emulate the marriage of their parents? Why or why not? What would they want to keep from their parents' marriage if their parents were married versus what would they want to change? I think that can be a way to really get into specifics rather than just come up with it out of the blue, is to talk about someone else's marriage that you both know intimately and see what you like about it and what you don't like about it.
Mm-hmm.
I love all those questions. I think they're a really great way to get the convo going.
Such a brilliant way to just bring out such honesty around a topic that we don't really discuss. It's you just get married and then you think things work out. And it's also important to know what is the model of marriage that they've grown up with. I had this conversation with a friend of mine who every time I say marriage, she'll go, she'll throw up in her mouth.
Right.
And I asked her finally, what is it about marriage that aches you so much? And she said, when I think of marriage, I think of no sex. I think of everybody getting ugly. I think of two people just sitting on the couch and watching TV because that's what she grew up with her parents who are just So of course, marriage has that association for her. But
exactly,
for her to see a different side of marriage is probably more important than trying to convince her of marriage.
And honestly, maybe it's too tainted. Maybe it just isn't. And maybe she's not willing to unpack that or not interested in unpacking that. And so then maybe she's not someone where marriage makes sense for her.
I think one thing that, always comes up is just how judgmental we are on couples' timelines. Like they either got engaged too quickly or it's taking too long and something's wrong with them. And then you have like Love is Blind where you get engaged after 6 weeks.
2 days.
So
tomorrow.
Well, yeah, I guess, yes, technically 2 days, but then you have 6 weeks to be in person, which is still crazy, right? But that's what's shown to us on TV. That's like, when you know, it's instant. Like, how do you propose that we get out of our head about timelines and stop being so judgmental of everyone's?
I think the reason we're so judgmental is because it's something we can know about a couple, right? Because so much of another couple's experience is a mystery to us. We don't know what they're like when they're alone. We don't know who loves who more. We don't know if they're happy. We don't really know what is going on there. But what we do know is how long have they known each other? When did they get engaged? How long was the engagement? These are tangible things that we can be aha, that was the problem. I think that understanding that a lot of the times that we're judging other couples, it's so that we can say that we're not going to make that mistake. It kind of comes from a fear of well, if they got married after 6 months and then they got divorced, I just won't get married after 6 months and then I'll be safe, right? And so kind of just accepting that every relationship follows its own journey and timeline and that there is no secret sauce. There are people out there that, some military couples, don't know each other very long, but one of them is going to ship off. And so they have to get married to be able to go with their partner wherever they're about to be stationed. There are also couples that are together 10 years, get married and get divorced within a year.
Yeah.
What was that about? Couldn't tell you. That's their life. There is no magic number. And I think that we really, really want there to be one.
Yeah.
But this whole thing, this whole way that we can get more comfortable with marriage is by getting more comfortable with the discomfort of marriage and the fact that we don't know what will happen. I do think that the younger you are, the more time can matter because you are going to change and grow a lot. I also feel if you meet at 45 and you both have a lot of life experience and you realize you want the same things, an engagement after 6 months isn't that wild to me because it kind of makes sense. You probably know what you're looking for and you figured out this is what I was looking for. So I almost feel age has more to do with it potentially than the length of the relationship.
I kind of wish that I had gotten married in my early 20s because I was naive. I feel having a wedding, saying your vows and believing in death do us apart is kind of a beautiful thing that I will never experience again. But I kind of I'm really in love with the idea of really just one of those blinders on kind of marriage. And then maybe you get divorced later, but it's great to have that moment where you truly believe.
Ignorance is bliss. Yeah.
Isn't it also beautiful to not have those blinders on and to still take that leap with someone?
Yeah.
Yes.
It kind of means more.
I like that.
But that's why we do it twice. I believe in having 2 marriages in a lifetime. You have your ignorant marriage that lasts 10 years, 15 years, and then you have your real one, that's
trainer marriage,
that's your person.
The practice one.
Yeah, the starter marriage, and then train you, or maybe we have a third marriage. The longer we live, the more phases of these marriages we'll have. Maybe it's with the same partner, and most likely it's not. But it's kind of beautiful that we can have these marriages in different phases of our lives.
I love that. I think I'm curious, what your biggest surprise that you've learned being married.
It's really annoying that we don't have the same last name.
Oh.
It's just complicated, to do things. We went to get our vaccines and it had to be I'm John Blakesley, I'm Allison Raskin, we're married, but we were maybe on the same reservation, but it wasn't clear. We had different, it's just annoying to not have the same last name, but also no fucking way am I changing my last name.
Why is that? What's your reason behind that?
I have established myself as Allison Raskin.
Yeah, that's how I
have
feel.
a lot of attachment to Allison Raskin the person, Allison Raskin the brand. I'm also incredibly close with my family, carrying on their name, having the same last name as my parents. It's a Jewish name. I like that. Like if I became Allison Blakesley, I would sound like I was an aristocrat who like was just like sipping martinis at the country club, you know? So it doesn't feel like me. I don't know who that person is, but it is just like in day-to-day life, it is like kind of annoying to like have different last names.
And then I guess on the flip side, like what's something that you maybe built up that you thought would be really scary about marriage that really just hasn't proven to be an issue in the slightest?
I guess you know what it is honestly in this last year, our first year of marriage has been horrible, but not because of our relationship. He had a major career letdown where he's now having to sort of reassess his entire identity and his life and his path and who he is and what his future will look like, kind of just like worst case, you know, heartbreak and grief for him. My mom is dying. And so we kind of got thrown into the fire together. And so what's been wonderful is that marriage is all it's cracked up to be. That like we have helped each other through these nightmare scenarios, like our worst case, truly our worst case scenarios. And that if we didn't have each other, they would have been probably unmanageable. But with each other, we are getting through it.
Oh my God, you have me like tearing up over here.
Also, just like, I think this is what's the pro of marriage, the argument for marriage is
exactly.
If you had a best friend, you still would need to enlist his or her help and say, can you help me through this? But when you're married, it's like your family. Yeah. So, of course, you're going to be together as one unit, right?
I mean, we're living in New York right now. He came out. He's been out here for weeks. He's going to have to go back because he's starting a grad program. But, like, he's just living in my parents' house, caring for my family. And it's not a burden. It's what it means to be married, at least our understanding of marriage. Yes. And I'm very lucky that we have the same understanding of marriage and that it wasn't really even a question that that's how he would show up for me during this time.
I mean, I think that is a takeaway, though, of this whole thing is like ultimately there's so many reasons why marriage is irrelevant, why we don't need it. But at the end of the day, that is the love that we're looking for. And yes, of course, you can have that when you're not married. I don't want to say it's not possible, but like you've alluded to in many reasons of this, it makes it a heck of a lot easier and more natural sometimes. And I think like one of the reasons I know I want to get married is because I do think it has a shift of like feeling more like you're in a family together. And it's like that you're like entwined in you're like a true partner in life. Like even though you feel like your partner is your partner, I think it is that next level.
And some people don't need that to get to that next level, but some of us do, and that's okay.
And I think like what you were saying earlier is it's kind of romantic in a different sense that we have all these options and we still can choose to do this. That's something that's a little more traditional. And like I think I personally like have done a lot of things that aren't as traditional up to now, but there is something nice of having like some traditions preserved and deciding which traditions you want and being in control of it. I think in the past, marriage was problematic because it was something that you just did and you had no choice. And especially as women, we were financially like bound to this person. And I love the world that we're in now that we can still do the thing. We can have that like partnership and life bond, but do it in a way that, you know, makes us still an individual at the end of the day too. So instead of looking at like all the challenges, it's always good to look at like what we're getting nowadays as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, there is power in ritual. There's a reason that as humans, we like ritual and we like ceremony and we like attaching meaning to things and telling ourselves the story of our lives.
I'm learning that prenups are wonderful, especially if you live in a state that's not so fair with divorces. But it is good to have a conversation about a potential end in any relationship because we can't put these rose-colored glasses on and say, we're never going to break up. It's good to talk about what the ending could look like and what would lead up to the ending. But my biggest takeaway is marriage is such an individual thing. You have to figure out what works for you. And I feel like many of us spend so much of our time trying to convince other people that marriage is right or marriage is wrong. Who cares? You're not marrying all these people. You just need to figure out what's right for you. It's not your job to convince other people what's right for you. You know what's the best for you. And ultimately, that is the North Star, is what kind of relationship do I want to have that serves me best, that works best for me and me only, well, me and my partner only. However people want to do their relationships, good for them because they figure out a way to do it themselves. Let's just get this debate of marriage out of the way. It's just so counterproductive. Just you do you. Figure out what's right for you.
Love that.
I'm holding your book right now. If people want to get their hands on your book, I think. Where can they find it?
Pretty much anywhere books are sold. It comes out October 15th. You can also get the Audible version where I narrate it. And it should be available on Kindle, hardcover, kind of anywhere where you can get a book.
Awesome. And we'll link it in the bio as well.
Thank you so much.
This is such a hot discussion. I love this discussion about marriage because the world is changing, society is changing, and these definitions of relationships and commitment will be ever evolving. So for all of our listeners, what did you take away from this episode? Did you learn or expand your definition of marriage and commitment? Why don't you drop us a line by giving us a rating and review in Apple Podcasts? Give us 5 stars, but in the body of your review, you can tell us, what did you learn? Or what do you think marriage means? Or why are you pro or against? Whatever it may be, anything related to marriage, drop it there and then we'll read it on a future episode. And I'm sure Allison will be appreciative of those comments as well. We'll share them with you. Do that. And then while you're online, why don't you pre-order our book, How to Be Dateable, coming out in January 2025. We actually do touch upon getting clarity on what you want in a relationship, which is very related to this topic. So with that, we're going to wrap up this episode. Stay dateable!